Thank you, Ria. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Pearson Edexcel update on the draft subject criteria for GCSE French, German and Spanish, and a consultation that is currently open. My name is Eva McManaman. I'm the Senior Qualification Manager for Languages at Pearson Edexcel. Although I'm alone delivering, I'm not alone in supporting you on this event. In the background, I have a number of colleagues who are ready to answer your questions, which you put into the Q&A pod. We've got the live chat, the group chat open for this session because we are really interested in hearing all your thoughts and feelings, views, opinions. Highlight that because there's quite a number of you on the event, I can't always follow what's being talked about on the group chat. So please don't put any questions in there that you want me to answer because I wouldn't be able to answer them. If you've got a question, put that into the Q&A pod, but let's use the group chat for lots of discussion and expressing of our thoughts and views about the different aspects. Okay, so first of all, begin with some polls, which would just like to know who's in the room, and we always do this at the start of any of our events. So if you could quickly submit your answers onto these polls, let us know how long you've been teaching, and then I'll move on to results. There's a few now before I move on to the agenda and onto the main event. Okay, so lots of teachers over 5 years. I'm imagining that this event, because it's about the consultation, may have attracted more the heads of departments. You can let me know if that's correct or not in the group chat. But kind of welcome. Now I'm going to ask which languages you normally teach, and I'll just say whilst you're inputting your responses, this is about the update to the subject criteria for French, German and Spanish. As of yet, nothing's been said about any other languages. So it may be the case if you are a teacher of the other languages, you're more than welcome to listen for your interest and to understand what's happening in the language world. But as of now, we are not hearing that this is going to affect other languages, definitely not in the short term. So it may be that you, if you don't feel like it's going to be appropriate for you to listen to this event right now, I won't be offended if you do drop off. But of course, you're more than welcome to listen. Okay, fantastic. So a majority are French, Spanish and German. And finally, just to kind of find out who's in the room, which award and organisation you currently use, because these events are open to any centre, any teachers. So do just let us know. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, 50-50. Wow, Corinne, 20 years. That's a long time in teaching. You've done well. I'm just going to go back just to see if it remains 50-50. Oh, no. Mostly, I was quite surprised at 50-50 Pearson AQA, but majority Pearson, but a good percentage of you are also AQA, so welcome. Thank you for attending our event. Okay, so the agenda for today. This is all about providing you with information. Okay, I want to provide you with core information and links regarding the subject criteria. I want to explain to you why this change is happening now. Glad to hear it, Corinne. And I want to talk about the draft criteria and how they differ from the existing GCSE and the ways in which the new GCSEs will potentially look different. And I say potentially because obviously we're still at consultation stage. And throughout that, I will reference consultation questions. So you can see kind of where they can ask you for your views. And at the end, I would give you sources of other information, other commentators on the consultation and subject criteria, so you can kind of access a wide range of views. Okay, so for the core information and the links on the subject criteria. They state that the proposed first teaching is September 2023. That is the current your current year 7. Okay, and the proposed first assessment will be summer 2025. And there are 2 consultations. The DfE has produced published a consultation on the content of the subject criteria, whereas Offqual published a consultation on the assessment. Okay, so just so you're aware, there are 2, and they both close on the 19th of May. Okay. So a quick poll is, if you have had a chance to look at the details of the draft subject criteria, is your initial reaction, very positive, mostly neutral, mostly negative, very negative? So just kind of, if you have had the chance already to have a look, I mean, you haven't had anything else to be doing with your time right now, have you? So well done if you have managed to look at the subject criteria. Okay, so that's interesting. So there's a 50%, it's not a majority, but half of you are mostly positive, but then there is quite a spread across the others, and when you add together the mostly negative and neutral, you get an interesting split happening, don't you? Okay, thank you. I'll find out later how many people that actually involves, because obviously it might not be everyone in the room. Okay, so if you haven't already accessed them, when you finish this event, you can kind of use the slides and scan these QR codes, and that'll get you to the subject criteria, which I'll be kind of picking elements out from, and the consultation online. That's a DfE one. And this next slide has the QR code for the Offqual one. That one focuses on the new assessment objectives, the fact that the new GCSEs will continue to be tiered with no mixing of tiers, and the proposal for the non-examined assessment to be used for spoken assessment, and that to be 25%. So the Offqual consultation is very much on those assessment-y kind of elements, the technical elements. Right, so why is this change happening now? There's many versions of this why question. Why now? When we've obviously gone through the year that we've gone through, that is a good question. There's a lot of change that has happened, that you're still having to respond to and deal with, and obviously it's going to have ramifications for a couple of years to come, we would imagine. And also you might argue that the current GCSE, it only started in 2016. The first assessment was in 2018. Then we had 2019, and then we haven't actually had a formal assessment since. So there's only been 2 sittings, so 2 substantial sittings of the current GCSE. So why change them? There was going to be an adjustment to the grading at level 7 and above for GCSE French and German in 2020. Obviously, that hasn't quite had we haven't seen the effect of that yet. And we also ourselves had created our own accessibility amendments, and they were going to be first assessed this summer in summer's exams. Now you won't be seeing how those amendments pan out in a live exam until November exams come out. So there's been changes, but we haven't seen the effect of those changes yet. So why make further changes to the GCSE? However, I just kind of check. There's anything else I want to say? Obviously, there has been it's been a very turbulent time, but there was a pedagogy review that was published in November 2016. So at the same time of first teaching of the current GCSE, a pedagogy review was published, led by Sir Ian Balcombe. And there's a link there, so in case you want to read the detail, there were 15 key findings of that, or 15 recommendations from that pedagogy review. And I've just pulled out 2 just because they're quite relevant to what has now happened with the subject criteria. So the first one, recommendation number 2, was pupils need to gain systematic knowledge of the vocabulary, grammar, and sound and spelling systems of their new language. Okay, and these need to reinforce this knowledge with extensive planned practice and use in order to build skills needed for communication. So that vocab, grammar, sound and spelling systems, or phonics, that's key to the new subject criteria, and it's key to something else which I'm about to talk about in a moment. Recommendation 10 was saying that spoken and written language are closely connected and overlap. Therefore, speaking, writing, listening and reading should be taught together rather than as separate skills. And I think that recommendation kind of pans out when we're looking at assessment in the fact that the assessment objectives have changed. And I will show you how they've changed and they've become more integrated rather than having one assessment objective per skill. So just pulling out those key things. But if you want to look at it in review, there's a lot more detail there, looking at kind of lots of aspects about MFL. So that's kind of the start of this change. After the pedagogy review was published, then nselp came into existence. So they're starting with a language hub school network. So there was these hub schools and around them a number of other schools, and the hub school served to disseminate good practice, kind of share best practice, and it was targeted at disadvantaged areas. So that happened in 2018, and then that developed into nselp, which is the National Centre for Excellence in Language Pedagogy, which is funded by the DFE. And again, they are all about working in partnership with the university, teachers, leading schools and the language hubs to improve language curriculum design and pedagogy. And they have a resource portal with lots of, which is open to everyone, free resources, where there's material supporting language learning, particularly in the areas of vocabulary, phonics and grammar. Do they sound familiar? So, you know, the terms of the pedagogy review come through in the outlook for nselp, and then they will also then come through in the subject criteria, and I'll show the connection as we move along. So I've just got a few questions just quickly about nselp, because we understand that it's not commonly known to everyone, but I just want to test that with this audience. So a few polls. Have you heard of nselp? First of all, excuse me while I sneeze. No, gone. Okay. No answers yet. I'll go back and wait for the answers. So have you heard of nselp? Oh, 50-50. I never believe it when it says 50-50. I always think that it must be, that's too neat. There we go. Okay, so more no's than yeses at the moment. So that's really interesting. So it'd be kind of interesting to, if you can comment in the group chat how you know of nselp, kind of where, you know, what you know of them. And for those of you who've never heard of them, obviously that's something that you can maybe look into and explore. Next question, if you have heard of them, have you accessed their scheme of work, resources, etc.? Have you actually kind of made use of the materials that they provide? So again, I'll just wait a moment to get people's responses. No. Again, never trust it when it just says 100%, so I'll go back. Okay, right, and again, so even though people have heard of them, 2/3 around about maybe haven't actually used the resources, so that's interesting. And finally, for those of you who have access to the resources, so the elements are getting smaller and smaller, would you recommend them to others? So, and of course, you can, if you say other, you can kind of comment in the group chat to explain kind of your thoughts. And just to highlight to people who think they haven't used nselp resources, just to highlight that the Oak National Academy lessons were provided by nselp. So any ones to do with languages, they were nselp derived lessons. So if you didn't think you'd use them, you may have used them. Okay, right. Wow. Okay, so that's interesting. I'm really interested in what the other is. If people could put it in the group chat, if you've got the group chat open, and you could just explain what, you know, the other is, or if you say yes, why? If you say no, why? It's just kind of a way of kind of sharing thoughts. This is the best way we can do a network with kind of so many people on the event. We can't facilitate network breakout rooms. We hope to get back to networking in the future, but right now, okay. So I'm going to move on. Feel free to add things in the group chat as you get a chance to. But so all of this pans out because the subject content panel, the panel which created the subject criteria, the names were released in November 2019, and the top 6 of those names were all involved with the pedagogy review. And you can see that nselp appears a number of times. So you've got Rachel Hawkes, co-director of nselp, Emma Marsden, director of nselp. So clearly, it's kind of a strong nselp influence on the material that is kind of the subject criteria that's being created. So hopefully that kind of gives you an understanding. I'm not sure it answers kind of why now would the pedagogy review suggest, there needs to be an improvement in the teaching of MFL pedagogy, MFL teaching, in order to raise standards. That's kind of the view, and I think the view is that the current assessments are considered too difficult. But of course, grading wouldn't actually be affected because of comparable outcomes. So even in the new GCSE, the grading would still need to be pegged to the same grading at the previous students, so that no one was unfairly disadvantaged. So just kind of highlight that element. Okay, so how do they differ? Well, I'm going to ask you, first of all, what do you think are the most important things to change about the current GCSE assessment? Okay, so I've said for you to select 3, if you don't mind. It's quite a lengthy list, so do make sure you go down before you make your decisions. Severe grading, tiering options, organisation by themes topics, assessing of deduction, inference skills, the use of authentic texts, the rubrics in the target language, spontaneity, communication, vocabulary list, the gap between GCSE and A-level, or other. Okay, so select your top 3. I'll give you a moment just to have a little ponder on that. Okay. Okay. I'll just go back just to see whether right, there you go. So, of course, severe grading, as I mentioned, I'm not sure what will happen about severe grading, or, the impression that it's not just an impression, the fact that students taking languages don't seem to be able to get as high grades as the other subjects that they take at GCSE. That's kind of a proven, that's factual information. But tiering options, interesting, that's quite a strong one. Rubrics in target language, lots of people would like that to change. The gap between GCSE and A-level, that's kind of a strong one as well. Assessing of deduction and inference. Okay, so, and the lower ones, things which people are less bothered by, they don't want to see communication go, they don't want to see organisation by themes topics go. Okay, so, right. Okay, so actually going to tell you now what the changes are. So the assessment objectives, currently they're organised 25% per skill, listening, reading, writing, speaking. And the grammar, vocabulary knowledge is integrated, and it works out around, it's meant to be 10% of marks for grammar and vocabulary. Removed kind of from those assessment objectives, what you don't hear is communicate and interact effectively in speech. And you don't hear communicate in writing. And this word communicate, it doesn't appear much in the new subject criteria. Communicate appears once and communication appears once, whereas in the current GCSE, in the subject criteria, communicate was, I think, written about 6 times. I've got it written down somewhere. The actual, yes, communicate 6 times, communication twice. So, it's a nuance, but it's quite interesting nuance. And in terms of the assessment objectives, you see that they're a bit more like the A-level ones, if you're familiar with A-level, whereas that integration, so understand and respond to spoken language in speaking and writing. But you note that there's a difference in the percentages. So when it comes to understand and respond to written language in speaking and writing. So there's a greater percentage for responding to the written language. And then there's a separate assessment objective for accurate application of grammar and vocabulary. And also those of you who are familiar with these A-level ones, there's a further assessment objective about culture, but that's not included for the GCSE. Okay, so culture not included here. And as I said, it's the Offqual consultation which deals with all things assessmenty. So it's the Offqual consultation which will ask you whether you agree with the proposed assessment objectives, if you have any comments on them, whether you, and this is where if you want to talk about tiered assessments, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the proposal to use tiered assessments, and question 4, would a proposal to require a single tier of entry for the assessment? So those of you with strong feelings about tiering, you want to go to the Offqual consultation. And the other questions on the Offqual consultation, do you have comments on the proposal to use tiered assessment? So again, I'll give you plenty of chances to talk about that. To what extent do you agree or disagree with the proposal to use NEA, non-examined assessment, to assess students' spoken responses? And then more about the NEA, the last few questions. So you can see that the Offqual consultation is all about the assessment, and if you want to have something to say about tiering, make sure you respond to the Offqual consultation. Okay. But now I move on to the more the general details of the subject criteria. Okay. Sorry, I was just seeing a comment. So the introductions and aims. I pulled out kind of this element of paragraph 3. Courses will ensure systematic, well-sequenced coverage of the specifications and linguistic content. I've pulled that out because that mirrors the language that was in the pedagogy review about the desire for systematic teaching, well-sequenced lessons, which is what nselp was provided, is providing in through their resources. So you can see the kind of this theme going through the subject criteria. It's quite interesting because it's not normally the role of subject criteria to stipulate how a specification is going to be taught. It's normally just about what's meant to be in it, and then obviously it's down to the teachers to decide how they will sequence their lessons. So it's quite an interesting shift. And then in paragraph 5, this is where the one place where it mentions communicates, and perhaps you could argue that it's at the beginning of the subject criteria, therefore it's kind of overarching that, you know, through studying the GCSE in the modern foreign language, students should develop their ability and ambition to communicate in speech and writing. But that is the only place where the word communicate comes. And this is one element which I'll come back to. The other bit I'll embolden subjects which are meaningful and interesting to them. And I'll come back to that later because the vocabulary list kind of influences that aspect. So, and this is where, now vocabulary, there's going to be quite a few slides about vocabulary because there's quite a large amount of paragraphs in subject criteria about vocabulary. It is the basis for the whole specification, in a sense, kind of, or what will be the specifications. They will all have to fall off from the vocabulary list. So I will be spending some time on this and trying to kind of pull out the details for you so you can understand kind of how this works. Now, so for foundation tier, we will have to have a vocabulary list of 1,200 items. Okay. And those items will have to include everything, because no assumptions, we should make no specific assumptions about vocabulary previously taught. So we will not assume that you've learnt about, you learnt your numbers and your pets and your colours, etc. in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3. That will not be assumed. If we want those words to be tested in the GCSE, we will need to include them in a vocabulary list. That's at foundation tier, 1,200. At higher tier, another 500, so 1,700 words. So it's a very kind of defined amount of vocabulary that will be on a list. And that vocabulary is going to be known receptively and productively. There's not going to be any kind of little R's that say that this word is only for receptive knowledge. All vocabulary, receptively and productively. And that's in paragraph 14 for both comprehension and production. And we have to compile this with close and explicit reference to frequency of occurrence in the language. Okay, so this is where we start moving into the need to use a corpus, and the corpus that nselp use for their work is kind of a Routledge corpus. I'm sure others are available, but that's what we've been using when we've been exploring vocabulary as we've been looking at these subject criteria. I'm sure there's plenty of other corpus out there, but that's been kind of recommended. Now, what's interesting about this is that corpus obviously are a moment in time. They don't continue to develop. This year we would have had the word social distancing in all languages would have been a key word and probably would have been spoken very high on the frequency list, but that's not going to be in these corpus because they were already published way before the COVID pandemic. And also where the corpus, what kind of data the corpus use to test the frequency, where they're getting their sources from is something that needs to be explored, because I'm not aware of a corpus of language spoken by 16-year-olds or read by 16-year-olds in the target languages. That would be amazing if we had that, but I don't think that exists. So the corpus that we do have do use sources which you may not consider appropriate for 16-year-olds, things like court transcripts, newspaper articles, government debates, there's an interesting range of language that appears that is frequent because of the types of sources, but you might not expect your 16-year-old to need to use or want to use. So that's an interesting element here. It goes on. This is all the subject criteria. There's quite a few paragraphs all about vocabulary. So paragraph 15, at least 90% of words must be from the top 2,000 most frequently occurring words. So that means, for example, for foundation, if we can have 1,200 words on a list, that means 120 of them can come from outside the top 2,000, but only 120, no more than 120. So that's kind of that element. There's a few more details about the fact that you need to include cognates, that you need to include compound words, that the list needs to be explicit and representative balance of different parts of speech. And what's interesting about corpus, obviously frequency, often the frequent words are those little grammatical words, prepositions, the little kind of elements which hold sentences together are frequently used, but they might not hold the content, the meaning that you want to talk about. So it's interesting kind of that you have to think carefully about what words and this balancing of different parts of speech. And then paragraph 19 makes it clear that at higher tier, there might be words which aren't on the list, but if there are ever words that aren't on the list, they will be glossed in an exam setting. So this glossing that was going to come in for the summer 2021 exams, but obviously then that didn't happen, that is something that will be in place in the future assessments. So for example, if I had a piece to read which was 50 words long, only one of those words could be glossed. Only one of those words could be not from the vocabulary list. Okay, so it takes out any element of surprise or, it's a case of if you've learnt the vocabulary list, hopefully you'd be okay. So, that's something to consider. Okay. I'm not sure I picked up on the point. Oh, this is what I did want to say in this one about the vocabulary. If it's not specified for Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 3, now there's an element here that that Key Stage 3 learning, therefore, will that be informed by the vocabulary list that's created for GCSE? So, I mean, if anyone wants to kind of communicate their thoughts on whether they would stick to the GCSE vocab list in Key Stage 3 or whether they'd share, they would be likely to do other topics or stick to what they normally do. It'd be interesting to hear where you think your department might go. Okay. I just wanted to give you a sense of the kinds of words which don't appear in the top 2,000 in those corpus. It's quite surprising. It's quite interesting when you start looking at these words and you think about what you might want to teach your students. And we're thinking, obviously, an exam board, we've got 120 words for foundation, 170 words for higher tier, which can come from outside. Which words would be put in there? How quickly could we use up all those words which are from outside the top 2,000? And if you can see here, for French, Madame and Monsieur are, but not Mademoiselle. So, there's a social comment there, isn't there? The breakfast in all 3 languages, it does not appear in the top 2,000, so we won't be talking about what we've had for breakfast. Lots of, surprising, words which you think, but surely that's, frequent, fromage, and surely, but it does not appear in top 2,000. And then words for clothing, words for grandparents, but again, in all the languages, grandparents don't appear in the top 2,000. Subjects, so there might be one or two subjects, but all the other subjects that they study might not be in the top 2,000. And so there's going to be choices that we need to make. Colours, you'd think that it's a cultural element, but you'd want students to not understand what a schnitzel is if they're learning German. And Spanish, the day Tuesday doesn't appear, or the seasons spring and autumn, they don't appear. I thought it was quite amusing that the adjective aburrido for kind of bored. I was just imagining the 16-year-old who can't say that they're bored would be frustrating for them. And don't ask me why. We have kind of investigated this. In the Spanish corpus, España is not in the top 2,000. We were looking for lots of different countries, and it appears that none of the countries are appearing in the top 2,000 in Spanish, but yet they do appear in other languages. So it's one of those quirks that just goes to show that it's very interesting working with a corpus and trying to make these decisions. We'll have to make these decisions about what type of language we'll include. So, because there was a lot of detail about vocabulary, there are a lot of questions in the consultation about vocabulary. So I'm just listing out here. I think we've kind of talked about most of them. 90% must come from the top 2,000. How many words there are for higher and foundation? So you might think that there needs to be more or less. Right, this third one. Do you agree that the vocabulary list proposed for GCSE should set out all content required for GCSE? Even though in many cases some of this may have been learnt prior to the start of the GCSE course itself. Okay, so this really makes it clear that the vocabulary is the content that you have to kind of focus on. More questions. I told you there's a lot of questions on the vocabulary. Do you agree about cognate words? Should appear, including and counting defined vocabulary, which reflects their frequency and occurrence. Do you agree that no more than 2% could be glossed? And then there's a point about cities and countries that proper nouns, that if they're not listed in the top 2,000, they could be added in an adjacent glossary. So they've got a question about that as well. But what we found interesting is that surely we're thinking about the students who want to talk about where their family come from. They want to have the language to be able to talk about that and the vocabulary for that. So we still want those words on the vocabulary list. But we're working through that. We're thinking about that. So yeah, I get the sense that lots might be asking questions in the Q&A because I'm not seeing anything in my group chat, whether my group chat needs to be updated. I maybe have just missed lots of group chat. I'm going to open it up again. But yes, I get the question about where these 2,000 words come from. In the nselp resources, where they talk about corpus, they talk about their decisions on which corpus and the types of details in the corpus. They actually say kind of what types of documents are used per corpus, because it is a bit different between French, German, and Spanish. Like the French one uses Canadian, I think, court transcripts or Canadian government transcripts, something like that. So, you know, there are kind of differences between the languages. German uses kind of quite academic sources, and I'm looking at my notes here. The French has government debate. Spanish uses conversations from 11 different countries. So then you'll get, I think the word mass comes up, which I know you would expect mass to be common, a frequent word, but mass in the South American way of using it, where it's kind of quite tagged on often to the end of sentences, and it's very frequent because of that usage. So yeah, it's a very interesting range. But the nselp website does kind of give details about the corpus and what type of sources are used. Excuse me. So that's vocabulary dealt with, I think. And as I said, because of the sources, there's lots of words which you wouldn't expect a 6-year-old to use. So words like contract, to invest, growth, prerequisite. You know, you can imagine that vocabulary in journalism and in news broadcasts, but it maybe not the kind of language that you expect your 16-year-olds to need to learn. But, you know, there is 2,000 words to choose from, and only 1,200 needed for foundation, only 1,700 needed for higher. So, you know, there's space. So it's kind of some interesting choices. Okay, moving on, because we've got 20 minutes left and there's a lot more to get through. The 2015 subject criteria, they talked about including literary text. That is not stated in the 2021 subject criteria. There's no reference to literary text. That's not to say that literary text couldn't be used as kind of for reading set tasks, but of course they would have to fit into the vocabulary requirements. So, you know, there may be the need to abridge, amend, adapt the literary text. So that's one key point. The 2021 subject criteria states that because the vocabulary is specified by the frequency of occurrence, it will be well suited to communication about a wide range of common themes and topics. And that's all they say about themes and topics. There's no other stipulation about themes or topics. There's no statement about what they shouldn't be. It's just, you know, that the vocabulary being based on frequency will cover a wide range of topics. Again, someone from nselp, if you're on Twitter, Natalie Finlayson has kind of shared some topic lists from the top 2,000. If you kind of were interested in seeing what types of topics could be created from the top 2,000 frequent words. So that's somewhere to go. So, I mean, a question for you: how far do you agree that the course should not be organised by themes and topics? And I noticed that it was quite low down, and I know there was some discussion about the style of that poll question. I mean, it was a rough and ready poll question, so I'm sorry if I didn't analyse it effectively in the short time I had, but I just wanted to get a quick sense of kind of what was the top feeling on. But this one is about how far do you agree that the course should not be organised by themes and topics? So that's quite a strong feeling against that. So you feel that it should be organised, almost 2/3. But there's still some people who think it shouldn't be organised by themes and topics. So, you know, so say 10% totally agree, somewhat agree. So that's it's interesting. And again, you know, it'd be good to hear kind of people's views, and for people to, if they are able to explain in the group chat their thoughts about this and why it's important to them. I know that there's kind of views about the number of themes and the amount of vocabulary that has to be learned because of those themes, and obviously by having a set vocab list, a set amount of vocab, kind of that wouldn't happen. But to have no themes and topics, it's an interesting issue, because, you know, DfE do pull that out in their consultation. It is one of the questions. Do you agree not to require, with the proposal not to require overarching themes and specified topics? And do you agree that teaching assessment will instead be informed by the vocabulary specified for teaching? Because then it could cover a range of topics because it's frequent vocabulary. Okay, so, you know, there's specific questions about themes and topics in the consultation for you to kind of consider. Question types, there might be a round of applause for this, where questions are designed to test comprehension of written and spoken texts in the assessed language. These comprehension questions will be in English. Okay, so, and also rubrics will be in English. And so no more rubrics kind of in target language, definitely not. And some questions can be written in target language, but not where they are designed to test comprehension. Because I guess it's that idea of a double test. First of all, we have to understand the question, and then we have to be able to apply the question and get the answer from the text. So it's almost a double test of our language skills. So that's been removed. Okay. And there are consultation questions, checking kind of your feelings about that. Grammar, there is a lot. There are whole annexes or appendices to the subject criteria about grammar. So I suggest that you do go and look at your language and look at the detail. But the key point to make is that students will be required to demonstrate both receptive and productive knowledge of the grammar from the list. Nothing will be just for receptive. It is both receptive and productive. Now, some aspects of grammar that are currently in the foundation will now be found on the higher list, so that's a shift. Some aspects of grammar would now be classed as vocabulary, which means they have to be part of our 1,200 or 1,700 vocabulary list limits. So here's some examples from German of possessive adjectives and pronouns, which would now have to be part of a vocabulary list. And there's been some aspects of grammar removed, such as pluperfect, perfect passive, subject, etc. So, you know, there's a shift in the grammar requirements, but I can't do it justice in this event. You would need to look at the details for your specific language. But here's the question. Do you consider the grammar annexes to be comprehensive, unambiguous and easy to understand? So you need to go and have a look and judge for yourself whether you feel that is the case. This is another interesting element which has been commented on, that this new GCSE criteria will bring in the assessment of sound symbol correspondence, or phonics. So the ability to know and be able to apply the principles by which spelling represents sounds, and use clear and comprehensible pronunciation when speaking the language will be assessed. And that this knowledge about SSCs is the same for both foundation and higher. It's laid out again in the annexes. So this kind of, I can go into detail about this in a moment, but just a quick question. Do you agree that sound symbol correspondence knowledge should be assessed? Okay. Oh. Just waiting for the responses. There. Okay. Okay, really, again, so it's quite it's not fully one way or the other. There is kind of a difference of opinion about assessment of phonics. Of course, there's a difference in the languages. They all have elements which you need to learn and understand, but I don't think it would be out of place to argue that the sound symbol correspondence for French is probably a lot more difficult. I'm trying to be diplomatic here. There's a lot more to know than, say, for German and Spanish. There are things to know for German and Spanish, but I think probably a lot more for French. So that's kind of something to consider. Okay. And then there's questions about that. And these questions highlight this task. So this element of phonics, it would play into whether you agree with the requirement for students to read aloud short sentences from the written form of the language and demonstrate understanding of them. So that, I presume, would be assessing their pronunciation, their ability to convey what is written into the sounds of the language. And do you agree with the requirement that students undertake dictation exercises from short spoken extracts? So opposite way around, they hear it, and then they're going to have to write down what they hear with credit for accurate spelling. Okay, so those are the consultation questions that relate to the sound symbol correspondences. Okay, and now culture. And the reason, it is mentioned, it says that as they learn language, students should become familiar with aspects of the context of the countries and communities, and an appreciation of the culture, history, geography, and working environments is an integral part of a well-designed language course. However, what is clear is that culture or context is not going to be assessed. That is not an element to be assessed. It's also interesting that working environments, this appreciation of working environments is the only place where employment, kind of that sense of employment, is mentioned. In the previous subject criteria, it was very much about learning language for use in employment. That's not included here. That's not an expectation of the outcomes of this GCSE. It's not that they will be able to use it for employment. So that kind of, again, gives a sense of the types of content we might be covering. And there is, of course, a consultation question about culture and the culture of countries, and that, where, should learn about it. That's going to be through the vocabulary that they're learning, is not going to be specified or tested. So that's a key point about the new criteria. So for the last 10 minutes, I'll just kind of quick walkthrough of the actual specific skills and just kind of the details which don't appear. And I'm going to say thank you to Helen Myers, because she did a presentation for ALL where she shared a very detailed kind of comparison of the 2015 and 2021 subject criteria. And I fully state that I've made use of her work. So thank you to Helen. But I've summarised things here. So for listening, what you don't get in the 2021, which you did have in 2015, it does respond to spoken language, which is a strange thing to think that it doesn't say, but it just says understand spoken extracts. So there's a difference there between you won't have to, it doesn't state that you have to be able to understand the overall message, details, opinions. You won't have to deduce meaning or extract information, evaluate, and draw conclusions. So there's kind of higher level skills. It's kind of not referenced in the 2021. What is stated is that you'll understand spoken extracts, that it will be delivered at a pace which is no faster than a moderate pace, and that you'll undertake dictation exercises from short spoken extracts. So those are the things which are stated, and there's other things which aren't stated. Okay. And, consultation question about being out understanding spoken extracts at no faster than a moderate pace. Speaking, there's no longer reference interaction, okay? And I'll just say it now, it appears that the conversation element is no longer going to be part of a future GCSE. It doesn't say anything about taking part in a short conversation, asking and answering questions. The only place that the word conversation comes up is if you look on the 2021 column, undertake role play, simulating a context such as a social conversation, but that's part of the role play. It's not a separate conversation. There's no reference to speaking spontaneously or responding to unexpected questions or having to use rephrasing or repair strategies. Those aren't kind of reference. Well, it doesn't mean to say that students can't use rephrasing or repair strategies, but it's obviously very important for communication. Initiate and direct conversations that won't be needed. Producing extended sequence of speech, no. Expressing and justifying their own thoughts and points of views, not mentioned in 2021. All that's mentioned is, and it's quite clear, he's almost like the elements of a speaking task. Answer questions about a visual stimulus, such as a photograph, doesn't have to be. Undertake the role play, where instructions are unambiguous and there are no unexpected questions. And then read aloud using clear and comprehensible pronunciation, and demonstrate understanding of what you've read aloud. Okay, so it's quite a shift for speaking, as I'm sure you kind of recognise there. Spontaneity is not mentioned at all, and it's kind of things aren't to be unexpected. So do you agree that spontaneity should no longer be assessed? I'm sure kind of there's opinions about that. I know that it was always something that was asked about in training events. How can a student show spontaneity? Okay. Right. I'll just... Okay. So still a strong feeling that spontaneity should be assessed. Okay. And another question, how far do you agree that the ability to read the target language aloud should be assessed? And I guess this kind of falls back to where you were on the sound symbol correspondences, and how you felt about that. But do you think the ability to read aloud should be assessed? Okay, I'd just like to kind of go back and forth. Okay, that's interesting. So quite a number of you somewhat agree, but also a large proportion you totally disagree. So this goes to show that there's the real kind of differences in opinion in the MFL community. I think they've been played out here and shown here. Okay, I just want to quickly go through the last couple so we get to some other key points. So reading like listening, those higher level skills of deducing meaning, of inferring, they don't get referenced in 2021 criteria. All it states is understand written text and language. This read aloud, kind of, again, is that a speaking test or is that a reading test? And translate in writing. Vocabulary items, so this is the difference, there will be the potential to just translate a word or words and short sentences or texts. So, that provides kind of a range of ways of being able to show your translation skills, different levels. So that's detail for reading. And detail for writing, it doesn't say the word communicate. And I've referenced this already, how the word communicate seems to dropped off. They don't give the purposes. In the 2021, the purposes of the writing aren't laid out in the way they were in so much detail in the 2015. And it was a lot of detail that we kind of, as awarding organisations, we had to kind of make sure that we were showing how we were testing different purposes of writing. But that doesn't appear. It's just write text in a language in a lexically and grammatically accurate way. And that word accurate kind of keeps on repeating. It's all about accuracy based on simple and familiar stimuli. Undertake dictation exercises from short spoken extracts with credit for accurate spelling, and then the translation. So that's a real whirlwind through. And the final DFE consultation question is, do you consider the revised subject content to be unambiguous, clear and easy to understand? So once you've kind of worked your way through all of it, kind of you'll have your answer to that question. But before you kind of go, I just want to make sure you understand where there's other places to get information. Hopefully I've given you the basics of kind of what the differences are. But in terms of for views and opinions, there's lots of other places to go for that. First of all, ALL, they, as I mentioned, Helen Meyer, she went through something similar to what I've just done, but for their members, they went through the criteria and looking at comparison. But they're hosting an event tomorrow, which is for members only. But in that event, they'll be looking for your views and opinions. So if you want to hear views and opinions and you're a member of ALL, attend that event tomorrow evening. And then that's when, because they obviously want to respond to consultation as ALL, and they want to reflect the views of their members. nselp has their own webinar recording where they look at the GCSE consultation, and of course they're looking at it from the viewpoint of how their resources will help you with teaching towards this new assessment style. So that's one place that you can find more resources and more information. And then there's kind of influential people in the language as well. And I want to apologise to Esmeralda for not having the A on the end of her name. I'm very sorry. But we've got Steve Smith, who's kind of given a very balanced kind of range of blogs on, different aspects of the consultation. Esmeralda kind of gives a, her gut reactions and then her thoughts as she kind of explored things further, type of blog. And hashtag Transform MFL, if you're familiar with him on Twitter, they provide a viewpoint which is one which kind of questions the use of the corpus approach and the top 2000 approach. So I just wanted to draw attention to all of these, and we have these links on the slides. And we have our own languages subject story. Kind of we are passionate about languages in Pearson, and so we've been trying to develop, our own kind of explanation of kind of why languages are important to our students. So please do kind of explore that. And of course, if you've got any questions or any kind of points of view that you want to share, please do contact Alistair Drury, your subject advisor. Or go to our Facebook page and leave kind of comments with us there. Please make sure you're following our Facebook page, because that's where we put on kind of updates about events or resources or and other events, for example ALL's events. And finally, do make sure if you have an opportunity and you get time later on in the summer to look at our PD Academy and see what else is available for your CPD needs. But otherwise, I hope that gave you the basic information about the consultation. And thank you for attending, and thank you for listening. And I wish you a good evening.